Hi, welcome back once again. My name is Vaishali, and today I'd like to talk about, is your story yours or somebody else's? Now, if we essentially look at human beings, we are storytellers, we are story makers, and that's the power of imagination that we have. That is how histories are created, and if we can dissect the word history itself, we can look at it in two parts: his stories, high stories, or even his tree. But however we choose to look at it, they are both personal and interpersonal. They are both individual and collective. It is through the evolution of these stories, through gossips, which grew on to taking the form of newspapers, went on to being broadcasted on radios, went on to being broadcasted on televisions, and now the social media. So why do we have these stories? Why do we have these narratives? Because essentially these narratives helped us survive in the wild. And then as we evolved from the wilderness into the civilized world, our narratives, our stories, collective and individual, helped us bring together families, helped us bring together communities, helped us bring about nations, helped us develop ideas and ideologies about religion, helped us bring organized institutions into the picture. And these organized institutions then had their own narratives that helped us kind of create a part of our identity, which goes just beyond being life forms. In fact, it gets more and more diverse. In fact, it also gets more and more collective. So coming back to the topic, is your story your own or is it somebody else's? And in order to get a little more into this, I would like to take the story of the ants and the grasshopper, which I think we all have read, or at least most of us have read as kids. And if you've not read it, somebody at least has narrated that story to us. So the story goes something like this, that there's a colony of ants that live below the surface of the earth, and they kind of see that the winters are fast approaching. And since the winters are fast approaching, wherein there will be snowfall, at least in the places that they lived then, it will be very difficult for them to gather their own food. It will in fact even be difficult to find the food in the first place. So these ants, who then are future-centric, essentially start working towards the known or the predictable future, which is scary, which can cause their extinction if they do not take care of it now. And so they work and toil really hard. They kind of keep walking one behind the other in a very organized, uniform, standardized line, and they go into their colonies. They deposit the grains or anything eatable that they have collected. They come out of the colonies and they start marching again. They start walking in that uniform, standardized line, one behind the other. They are very diligent. They are very consistent. They also probably are a little anxious when it comes to the future that they kind of foresee, given their own histories, given their own memories of the stored stories. So here, of course, we can then use the saying that it's better to be cautious than be sorry. On the other hand, there is this grasshopper, this sole solitary creature who's enjoying the warm, sunny afternoon, who's enjoying the warmth of the sun and is playing his music on his guitar or a musical instrument. He's least bothered about the impending winters. He's least anxious about what is to come, because who actually knows what the future holds. And so he's enjoying his day in the sun when he sees these ants walking in a line, hard working as they are, and he stops one of them to ask, "What are you guys doing? Why are you working so hard?" And the ants reply, "I think you should work hard too, because the winters are fast approaching. We'll soon have no food to eat. And if you don't do it now, your survival will be in question." And so he brushes them aside and he says, "Listen, I've got enough food for myself. I've taken care for myself. So while you guys toil away, let me enjoy the sunny day today." And so of course the ants keep working hard as the winters approach, and finally the winters arrive. And when the winters arrive, with the passage of time, this grasshopper realizes that he's running out of food. And then gradually he even starts to starve. And that is when he probably realizes that the ants were right. And he goes to the ants seeking their help. And of course the ants do help, because they have collected enough for the coming winters, for the winters that are here now, for the winters that had been predicted at some point in time. So the moral of the story that was told argued by the narrator was it's better to work hard and it's better to be careful than be careless and be lazy. And we all kind of learned that. And as beautiful and as profound that narrative might be, how were we not taught to question as to why are we comparing the ants and the grasshopper in the first place? Why is there a comparison between creatures who are inherently, naturally social by nature and somebody who's solitary almost all the time? Is it even a fair comparison to draw? Is it even justified, for one is identified with its community, with its colony, like the red ants and the black ants. On the other hand, one is self-identified. On one hand, while the ants follow one another and follow the leader, on the other hand, the grasshopper is his or her own leader. On one hand, where the ants share responsibilities and liabilities together, on the other hand, the grasshopper is completely self-reliant. On one hand, where the ants walk in teeny tiny steps, it is the grasshopper that takes quantum leaps. On one hand, where falling out of the group can essentially entail one's death. On the other hand, there is no group to fall out from. On one hand, where there probably is no individual identity. On the other hand, there is only self-identity. On one hand, where there is a chance to influence and impact a bigger group. On the other hand, there is no choice, there is no chance of impacting any group. On one hand, probably where the community co-creates and even to an extent dictates its stories on the individual. On the other hand, one is the narrator of their own solo story. On one hand, where the community can uplift and be responsible for the downfall of some. On the other hand, the other is completely responsible for its own upliftment or its own downfall. And then maybe on another thought, the author also realized that on some level it is a fair comparison to be drawn, because as humans we probably are the only species in the natural world that can choose and discern for itself when it wants to be social and when it likes to have its own space, wherein when it likes to be solitary, wherein when it chooses to be alone. It is the only species that has probably been able to discern the difference between being alone and being lonely. So in that aspect, the comparison is pretty fair. It's even rightly justified. So then again, coming back to, is it your own narrative or it's an interpersonal narrative, or is it somebody else's, and probably also understanding that it goes both ways. So how about then drawing another parallel in keeping with the original story? How about saying that these ants can be compared to the factory workers when the factory system was there at one place in time in the human history, and then seeing them as very, very hard-working, diligently working human beings who wear their uniforms, who go to an organization, who go to their colonies, work and toil really, really hard for the future that they are unsure of, or the future that kind of looks like a doomsday. They also work in the factories that produce these standardized products. There is uniformity in both of these places with regards to the products and the factory workers themselves. So here then probably is the factory or the organization that dictates their identities, that dictates their norms. And of course, it's very efficient, it's very streamlined, but probably it's also pretty joyless. And on the other hand, if we can draw the parallel of the grasshopper to a creative, to an artist who's a wild child at heart, who's curious, who's imaginative, who's impulsive, and who's just present in the now, least bothered about the impending future, we'll also understand that in order to be that creative, in order to be that free-spirited, it has to come out of the standardized norms or the ideologies set by the colony itself. He's probably the one who's more present in the now as it is, rather than being more focused towards the future. And so if we can bring in these two narratives together, and we see that on one hand, while these factory workers are really toiling hard and are probably joyless because they are more anxious about the impending future, they find their little escapes when they connect with this wild free spirit. They probably find a little relief from their anxiety, and they start living more in the now when they interact with this free spirit. And that is probably wherein they bring together the idea that I help you find your joy in the now, while you help me in the future when probably I'll not be able to help myself. How about also creating another narrative, another story from the original story itself? How about also saying that as joyless and as tedious the ants' life may come across to be, wherein they are not present in the now, but maybe their now is in with regards to the future. How about also saying that because of that, it makes them more efficient, it makes them more organized, and then probably drawing that parallel when we as Indians are driving on our roads. So when we are driving on the roads, and if everybody followed the rules that the ants did, I think the traffic would move more efficiently, more effectively. I think it would be more uniformed, more streamlined, and more energy efficient as well. But on the other hand, if everybody, or at least most people, started to behave like a grasshopper, which unfortunately in our country they do, it kind of creates an inefficient road system. Does that only get limited to the roads then? Does that not impact our physiology and our psychology? Does that not impact our memories? Does that not impact our individual and our collective stories with regards to the population, with regards to the chaos, with regards to the governance as well? And so understanding that since we are the only species who can discern to be ant-like or to be grasshopper-like when we choose to be, we should also be understanding enough to understand, to be able to discern that when we talk of these narratives, they are always in a context, that we are meaning-making creatures. Unless we are willing to sit with these narratives, look through those narratives, look into those narratives, the stories that are told to us, we will keep replaying those stories over and over again as they become a bigger part of our personal and interpersonal subconscious and even our unconscious. And unless we sit with these stories and shine light on them, bring it into our conscious awareness, the stories that have been told to us will keep running our lives, will keep running our narratives. So let's try and see if we can actually sit with our stories. Let's try and see if we can bring our subconscious into conscious awareness. Let's try and see where and how much can we edit our own narratives. Let's try and see if we can narrate our own stories our own way. Let's try and see that as we edit our own stories, can we create a different narrative both personally and interpersonally? Let's try and do that, and I will see you once again the next week. Till then, stay tuned in. And guys, if you do like the contents of my videos, please do like, share and subscribe.